And we are live, Senators.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Vermont State Senate Committee on Institutions. Today is the 21st of January, 2022. My name is Joe Benning. I am your host for this afternoon's performance of the committee. I am also the chair of the committee. I represent the district known as the Caledonia Orange District in the Senate. We also have on the committee, I'm going across my page, Senator Ingalls from Essex Orleans, Senator Mazza from Colchester Grand Isle, Senator McCormick from Windsor, and Senator Parent from Franklin County. Today, we are talking about the State House expansion in the first chapter of events this afternoon. And for the witnesses, I'm going to give the same spiel I do to everybody else. For those of you who have not been here recently, I learned that last week we actually had 100 viewers on YouTube for one of our afternoon discussions. So I have to assume that there are people out there who are looking at us for the first time, quite interested in the process of what committee work is all about. And you and I may be having a conversation about something we are both familiar with. But should you stumble onto something that I think might be red flag for the public and they're saying, what the heck is that about? I may interrupt you and ask you to explain A, B, or C, whatever that may be. When you're asked to testify, we do have a schedule, but when your name comes up, I would ask you to introduce yourself. Give us a little bit of a history about who you are and how you fit into the government process, and then we'll dive into the substance of why you're here to converse. With that, the first person under the chapter of State House expansions is our good Sergeant at Arms, Janet Miller. Janet, welcome back to Senate Institutions. Tell us a little bit about yourself first, if you would.
Hey, thank you, Senator Benning, and hello, Senators. Janet Miller, Sergeant at Arms, here at the Vermont State House since 2015. Part of my statutory rules for what I do is to honor the committees of jurisdiction, the House and Senate committees, and take into consideration what they would like me to do. And then I take care of the building security, and I have hired the doorkeepers and the Capitol Police. And we take reservations, we work on the capacity of the rooms and just overall upkeep of the building. We don't take care of all the maintenance. That's also, we get the help from Buildings and General Services to help us do that. But that's pretty much the role. So it entails a lot of different things that you may not even imagine that come up.
And so for those who are actually watching, we noticed on the Senate floor today, one of our guards, doorkeepers, if you will, which we haven't seen because we've all been on remote. You're in the process of having to hire both those individuals as well as the pages. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, our pages are not here right now, unfortunately, because of the status of the chambers. It's not the full experience for the kids right now. So we're hoping they may be back with us on January 31st when the House may be here or you may be here.
So for those listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, Janet would be the person you contact in the event you have a son or daughter who would like to be a page at the State House.
Yeah, they have to be in the 8th grade, but you start looking on our website at the end of their 7th. Well, when they're in 7th grade in the fall before they go into 8th grade. Does that make sense? Let's see. They start school in September as an 8th grader. So we like to have the applications in by September 30th of that year they are an 8th grader.
I applied to be a page and I didn't get it. Don Collins promised me I'd get it, so now I have his job.
Hey. It's a hard
story behind why you got rejected. I'd love to hear what that is.
we still have
it was before Janet's time. It was old Kermit Spalding was the Sergeant of Arms.
To be fair, it's not an easy process picking the pages and making everybody happy.
I happened to run into Don Collins. He was running a vendor booth at an auction, not an auction, but a antique sale down in Orford, New Hampshire this past summer. I should have, if I had known that, Corey, I would have asked him directly, why'd you reject Corey? In any event, thank you, Janet, for being here. Great introduction. Tell us, if you would, about the State House. You and I are familiar with what's been going on this past summer and fall, but none of the committee is. So that might be a great place to start us.
Yeah, so right now, Senator, we have moved some House committees around to our larger committee rooms that you may be familiar with as the bigger committee rooms downstairs that were rooms 10 and 11. And also the coat room also now is a committee room, a House committee room temporarily. And our coat room has been moved back to where Mike Ferrant was in the Legislative Council office. And also the lounge area that was for all of the House members and the senators has been turned into House appropriations. And this reason was that as most of you know, your rooms are small, but you have a little better ventilation, and the House rooms do not have as much. So we figured that they have more people and they needed to spread out a little bit more. So that was the decision of the first the advisory committee and then the joint rules committee. So in all the rooms now, we do have a bit of limited capacity because we used to, as you know, cram a lot of people into one space, standing shoulder to shoulder. And during this time, while we're still working on our ventilation system here in the Senate, we've decided to keep a little bit limited capacity because of that reason. And that's where we are.
Where'd Bobby Starr go? We find a spot for him?
Senator Starr, he still has his little room for himself and his colleagues that need to have a touch base in there. But the agreement was that he will share the the Senate Education. Yeah. So Senator Starr's Ag Committee will be in Senate Ed in the morning, and then Senate Ed will be in there in the afternoon. So that's a little bit bigger room for Senator Starr. And he graciously agreed to that.
All the House members made out great. The Senate members didn't do anything.
Interesting.
That's above my pay grade, Senator Mazza.
He's actually the one who started it all, Bobby Starr, because we realized he had the smallest room in the building. And then once you crack that door open, it just is a crazy set of dominoes that are falling in every different direction. You are here to talk with us today specifically about the request for proposal for potential funding. And I know there are several others. I don't know whether you personally were going to take the lead in that conversation.
So Senator, because I, as a sergeant at arms, in agreement with other committees, we've hired Trisha Harper, an architect that formerly was here at the State House working with buildings and general services. Trisha has been here through all of our renovations. She is probably the person with the most experience and institutional knowledge of this building, her along with, of course, David Sheets. But Trisha knows what wire went where and what time that happened. And so she's a great resource for me. And also her expertise as an architect brings a lot of knowledge for the legislature. So that being said, she understands all the phases of design and all of that. And of course, Dan Dickerson also helps us with budgeting. And but I would not be qualified to speak about the design and all that information that Trisha has. So I would kick the ball to her.
Trisha, welcome to Senate Institutions. I'm not sure how much you heard of the initial comments, but if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you fit into the government process for the benefit of our viewers who may not be familiar with all this. You and I are familiar with each other because we worked all summer and fall, but the committee, I don't think, has met you yet and would probably like to know a lot more about you.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Janet. My name is Trisha Harper. I am an architect, and I'm with Architectural Restoration Consulting is my firm. I did work for BGS for the last 20. Oh, here I am. A little problem. I've got you on my little problem. I've got you on my iPad, and I'm trying to
Pinch hitting for Pedro Borbon,
Okay.
Manny Mota. Mota.
The wonders of modern technology.
Oh, we can't hear you, Trish.
Trisha, you're muted.
I think it's too cold for a connection.
Yes, I don't know. I was trying to connect through my MacBook or my Mac Air, and I've got you on my iPad, unfortunately, and it's just not coming up because I wanted to share a screen with you, but we'll have to do that and hopefully rely on someone else to pull the screen up for the State House expansion schedule.
Alex, do you have that capability right now?
Yes, I'm able to do that. If you just, did you send that already to me?
With Janet, is it okay to open that up?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay. So Alex, I sent that to you at like 11 today, and there is 2 attachments to it. One of them is the PDF. Don't open that one. Open the Excel file because we'll be able to scroll through that easier and not have to do page by page when we're looking at it. That's okay. Okay.
Gotcha. I'll bring that up and just let me know how you want me to scroll around on it.
Okay. So I apologize for my not being able to get on one machine versus the other. So again, my name is Trisha Harper, and so I have been working at the State House for the last 27 years, and most of the restoration, renovation projects that happen there, along with other projects throughout. That I was over at the courts, and I've been working. I did the Lamoille County Courthouse, and anyway, for the last several years, I've been working on a lot of restoration projects, including the Secretary of State's restoration across the street. And this project is, Janet asked if I would be interested in for this position, and I applied and I received, I was hired, and so I retired from the state of Vermont in August and started this job in September. September 1st. When I started the project as a State House advisory, legislative advisor, it was the projects we had to do right away were the coat room renovations along with the new restroom, which are nearing completion right now. And also to Governor Aiken and the renovations over to Governor Aiken. So, and those are ongoing and they're still happening now and they're going pretty well. So the project that we're here to discuss is potential State House expansion. And working with the committee this summer, which I prepared this schedule to the State House Legislative Advisory Committee in October, November, and I revised it for the House Institutions Committee on 1/11/22, and therefore I'm showing you what I revised. And how it was revised is, oh boy, we'll need to stretch those columns, but because they're just showing number. But it is basically how it was revised is I took 2 months out of the timeline already, because when it was discussed earlier, I was looking at a middle January, February timeline, and now we're March 1st, if we meet this timeline. All right, the State House expansion has been contemplated for years. We've been looking at it. I think it was 2001 was the first time that I was involved in hiring an architect to provide schematic design and design development drawings for the State House expansion. And that was under a competition that was done. Prior to that, I had done prior studies reviewing how the building used and also developed some sketches that were used in hiring a a firm in developing the program requirements for the building, and the scope of work is what we intended for the architect. So at this point,
Trish, could I just interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
I don't know whether you were planning to or not, but for the benefit of our viewers again, could you just give us a brief explanation of what this is that we are looking at and how it's laid out?
okay, very good. So what I did is I prepared this schedule, and basically every project that is involved with an goes by a very similar staging on for development of drawings to bid the documents and construct. So the first phases of programming for development with an architect. So and the next phase would be design development. They're highlighted and bolded here. And then the construction documents, and then the CM construction documents for bid. So that's broken down into those. When you're doing a project, it's broken down into those sections. And I missed schematic design, I'm sorry. Schematic design is under programming. So there's the 5 phases. And right now we are looking at, that's how I established the schedule, by what could we do in this timeline in order to potentially make use of fundings that is available until 2026, the ARPA funding. And so the schedule is broken down into 2026 in developing documents in order to construct an expansion or an additional state house that would be able to use those ARPA fundings, take advantage of that funding available, was the concept on this schedule. So it is a very, very aggressive schedule. And I say that in order to use that funding up by 2026. And that's at the other end of that timeline, when we scroll through it. But so the different phases, in order to do that, we would need to, in order to hire an architect, in order to start these 5 phases of developing drawings, we would need to draft an RFP for architectural and engineering services. And that, as you can see on line 6, I think you can see line 6.
And RFP stands for?
Request for proposal. I'm sorry for the acronym. Yeah. And that RFP, request for proposal, RFP, you see in the next line, we would send that out to architects and ask them to submit proposals. We would ask for those proposals to be back by May 1st, and that they would be reviewed and approved, RNA, by the legislature and the owner for architectural services. It may require an interview so that we would know if this is the firm we'd like to go forward with.
Joe.
Yes, Senator Mazza.
Mr. Chair, are we getting the go-ahead to explore an expansion of the State House? Where is it coming from? I mean, is this something in the Capitol bill, or is this something, where are we getting the authorization to explore the expansion?
Trisha, do you know the answer to that question?
Well, I'd like to say that based on the State House Legislative Advisory Committee and the language that was put forth by that committee, I don't have it right here. That was the intent, was the request to move forward with this project to start developing documents for a State House expansion, where the expansion would be above the cafeteria, and that cafeteria addition would allow for House committee rooms and a new cafeteria.
Where's the money coming from to do all this exploration? Who's funding it?
Let me see if I can call up the language, Senator Maza.
Yeah, okay, because I'm not familiar with it. I'm just wondering if, I didn't know it was this far into the stages. I just thought it was something being talked about, but I didn't know it was going to move forward.
Yeah.
It's going to come out of some funding.
Well, right now I'm just, and I probably jumped ahead too far. Right, but basically the committee is requested that, Janet, do you have that language handy right now, or is Janet still on?
She's mute. Well, probably everybody else knows the answer. I don't know. Do you know, Mr. Chair?
I have an understanding that the State House Legislative Advisory Committee came up with a proposal and submitted that off to leadership. The funding is ARPA funding, so we're talking federal money. And the committees on institutions as well as appropriations are going to all be involved in this conversation at some point. But what you're looking at right now is what was delivered to the Legislative Advisory Committee. And it is still in the process, as I understood it last, of being discussed by those committees that would provide authorization.
Because no one's given any money at this point, right? There's no money involved?
Well, there is federal money involved, and it has to be spent by, I believe it was 2026.
But who's
So
made the
sorry.
decision to spend it?
I think Senator Mazza or Senator Dan is here also, because I know that Dan has been working on this side of it too. Excuse me.
Yeah, no, that's quite all right. I can't see anybody except for the speaker on my screen right now, other than the screen share. So if anybody has a question or comment, don't hesitate to jump in. But I think we'll get a little bit more of that answer, Dick, when we get to Dan Dickerson.
All right.
Dan does have his hand up.
He does have his hand up.
He's being polite.
How is it you guys can see each other and I can't? Huh. Well, that's interesting. Oh, I just did something that gives me 4 of you. Oh, we're getting there.
I found the language, Senator.
Okay, go right ahead.
Okay. All right. Proposed language for BAA. I don't know what that acronym is. Regarding State House expansion. Section FY 2020-22. State House expansion request for proposal, Sergeant of Arms, Department of Buildings and General Services, funding carry forward. On or before May 1st, 2022, the Department of Buildings and General Services, in collaboration with the Sergeant at Arms, shall develop and issue a request for proposal, RFP, for programming, schematic design, and the initial phases of design development documents for an expansion of the State House, including the infrastructure needs for any future phases of expansion. The sum of $1.5 million is appropriated from the general fund in FY 2022 to the Department of Buildings and General Services to perform the work described in subsection A of this section. Upon approval and funding from the General Assembly, it is our intent of the General Assembly that the Sergeant of Arms and the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services will extend the RFP for architectural and engineering services to finalize design, development, and construction and bid documents.
So we've already spent $1.5 million. We're going to be committed to $1.5 million, and who we have no say in it. I guess the legislature has no say in it. Is that correct?
First of all, I wouldn't.
This is just proposed.
Yeah, this is just a proposal.
Well, who has to okay the proposal? That's my question.
At the end of the day, the legislature has to approve the proposal.
So we haven't spent a nickel yet.
Not quite true. Money was set aside in order for the Sergeant at Arms to go through the process of doing things like hiring Trish to give us a proposed layout of what would be happening in the future. The other part of this being federal money, federal money has to be spent by a given date. So we are in what Trisha has described as an aggressive timeline. We are trying to cover all the bases as quickly as we can with what we have to talk about. But your questions are all valid, and I'm hoping by the end of the afternoon, we're going to learn all the answers to the question.
Okay, I'll shut up.
Trish, we're back to you.
Okay, so basically breaking that language down and looking at it in relationship to this schedule for the phase 1 State House expansion is to look at a addition over State House cafeteria is what the committee came up to, and moving the existing cafeteria upstairs to the second floor is what they hope would be the results of this proposal, and to create new House committee rooms on the where the existing cafeteria is now, so that they'd all be on the House floor. As many of them as possible could be on the House floor, except for the 4 that would remain in the 40s. I think it's 4. So that is the intent of this plan, is to develop this RFP is to develop the plans to move forward for a State House expansion using the ARPA funding, taking advantage of the ARPA funding if it becomes available to do that work. And in order to get more moving forward on this, in order to make that ARPA funding and take advantage of it, we have to move forward soon. And that was the intent of this schedule, this aggressive schedule. Request that the work, that an RFP be sent out and received back by May 1st.
Okay. I'd like to move this part of the conversation along a little bit just to keep to my own schedule. Trish, I don't know how much more you've got to tell us at this stage. I'm sure you're going to be back to have some more conversation once things become a little clearer on what the legislature's role is in this process. Do you have anything else you wanted to tell us this afternoon?
Well, I'd be happy to walk through the 5 phases of developing documents.
Trisha, I was thinking maybe we should, Senator Benning, if you don't mind, I think it might make a little more cohesiveness if we talk to Dan Dickerson first, because there is some caveats of the funding and the reasons why Trisha had worked on a different kind of timeline. And so I think it might make a little more sense, but that's up to you, sir, of course.
No, I think that's a perfect suggestion, Janet. Dan, welcome back to Senate Institutions.
Thank you all for having me. For the record, Dan Dickerson of the Joint Fiscal Office, and I'm here with my, I guess, legislative branch financial manager hat on, and I've been involved in the State House expansion discussions in that role. And I wanted to start by trying to give a little more background to, I think, to sort of clear up maybe if there's confusion, hopefully try to clear that up. But essentially, you know, the pandemic hit, the federal government passed the first Pandemic Relief Act, and the state received funding through the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And the states have been using that funding for a lot of different things, but we received some of that money. The legislative branch received some of that money in order to make modifications to the State House, buy safety equipment, health equipment. And we've used that money to hire Trisha and pay her to allow her to sort of work with Janet and figure out the planning and other things that go into modifications of the State House. So we've used that money up until now to pay for Trisha and to make modifications within the existing State House footprint, and also make modifications to some other buildings that we've taken over, 2 Aiken, 4 Aiken. So once again, this is all the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And we also, to add to that, we hired a firm, Freeman French Freeman, which issued a report that made recommendations for short and medium and long-term alterations, additions that can be made to the State House to make it more usable for legislators, for staff, and for the public. And so subsequent to that, the advisory committee for the State House convened over the summer, and using that report from French Freeman as a basis to sort of discuss options for how, whether or and how to modify the State House going forward. And they ultimately recommended that the expenditure of $1.5 million be made to issue a request for proposals to take a first step at building above the cafeteria in order to add usable space to the State House and make it better for everyone. The recommendation in the letter from the advisory committee for the State House said that 1.5 million would be general fund, but this is where I want to sort of put out some of the options that exist for funding this project. You heard Trisha allude to ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. Within that, there were two funding sources created that are going out to states. The first is the much larger state and local fiscal recovery fund. And, you know, we as a state are getting about $1 billion, and then municipalities are getting money too. And then the other fund is the ARPA Capital Projects Fund. And that's $113 million that the state will receive. And in the big bill that passed last session, which was Act 74, the General Assembly directed the executive branch, the Joint Legislative Management Committee, and the judiciary to make recommendations for how to use money to help those respective branches. And so the advisory committee on the State House made that recommendation to the Joint Legislative Management Committee of spending 1.5 million. But because the Legislative Management Committee was so slammed with other things, they never actually got around to reviewing this. And so now I think it's sort of become probably the institutions and appropriations committee's responsibilities to sort of debate the merits of the State House expansion. So I guess that's some of the background that gets us to this moment. Hopefully that helped clear up a little bit of, I think, some of the confusion that I think I was hearing. But as far as moving forward with this expansion and issuing the RFP, the language that the House inserted into this fiscal year's budget adjustment bill, which I think probably passed third reading today, essentially said, because we want to get this process started ASAP because of the aggressive timeline that Trisha talked about, in the short term, the legislature is appropriating 1.5 million of general fund in order to pay for this cost. And that general fund is coming from legislative branch carry forward that we've carried over the past couple of years because we've accrued it because legislators haven't been meeting in person. So we haven't been paying the travel expenses that we would typically pay. But in my eyes, and this is where I'm going to advocate for, as you discuss things and decide on, where to go with the State House expansion, my hope would be that 1.5 million shifts to this ARPA capital projects money. And, that could happen in the capital bill, or it could happen in the big bill. I'm just hopeful that it'll happen. But the total cost for the project, I think, and Trisha could probably correct me, I think is going to be anywhere between 10 or 15 million. And that includes the construction, that includes some structural modifications, some IT modifications. But this 1.5 million sort of is the first step. And, you can use the capital projects money. If you miraculously found capacity in the capital bill, you could, that's another source, but I imagine that's going to be much more difficult. I think the capital projects money makes the most sense. There's the other option that's also probably difficult is using the state and local fiscal recovery. But I think, that money is slated to be spent on very big transformative things, as the governor has stated it. And so, I don't know that he would get behind spending that pot of money on this, but I do want to just, put the options out there. the capital projects is the most ideal, but there are other ways, and so that could certainly be a part of the discussion going forward. But I think that was the extent of what I wanted to dive into, is just sort of the background and the funding options.
So Dan, if I could, as far as the conversation we're having today, we don't technically have the capital bill yet. And I'm wondering if you've already had this conversation with our House counterparts.
Yes, they made a recommendation to the Appropriations Committee as far as the language that went into the Budget Adjustment Act, but they haven't taken an official action in a piece of legislation. They made a recommendation, but I think that where you will possibly be involved is that, beyond the 1.5 million in this request for proposals, I think the discussion has to be, do we want to move forward? And it sounds like the House does, because they've passed in the BAA this first step. But I think what your committee will want to consider, and the Appropriations Committee will want to consider, is whether the Senate concurs with that. And so I guess I don't know if that'll go into the Capitol bill ultimately, but I imagine that you would want to be involved as the Institutions Committee.
Okay.
Senator Benning, I think Trisha does have a comment regarding something that Dan said.
Sure.
Yeah.
Trish.
Thank you, Senator. It was regarding the budget. The estimate for the addition back in it was 2002, I think, or 2005, actually, for the addition above the cafeteria was 10 million without mechanicals. So it's well up to 12 back then. So that, I think, is where that number is coming from. But now it's got to be at least double that. So this is just to start this 1.5 million for the development of documents. And there is also that line item on that sheet that you saw. It said 10 to 15% of the actual construction value is what is paid typically to A&E firms. So that's why I'm starting at 1.5, and it's going to be at least double more of that later. But I have not done a revised estimate because of the time that things where we are now. It's very hard to even figure out how much things are costing, and the availability and things like that. And it would be totally have to be based on an existing plan that we have that Feingold Alexander did back in 2005 for the State House expansion, showing the cafeteria on the third floor. That is possible to get an estimate done on that. It would just require hiring an estimator to give you a price exactly on those plans. But right now, there is no construction hard estimate. It was just based on 2004 or 5's estimate. Thank you.
Okay, so Senator Mons, I'm not sure how many of your questions got answered there, but the ultimate question I think you were asking, and correct me if I'm wrong, was, are we going to be able to debate on the subject of whether we go forward with the project or not? That part of the conversation was directed towards the committee on the State House that spent the summer and fall talking about that, and they were charged with coming back with recommendations. And what you're hearing now is the actual recommendation that was made.
It's just amazing that we can continue to spend money and on our own house, improve our own facility for 30 million or 25 million. And I don't know who has the final say, but I think the public out there would be pretty upset to think that we can better our facility with our own approvals. I'm very confused about this, because now we're talking of a major project, and maybe somebody ought to discuss taking the cafeteria out of there, and just that would solve the whole problem. Move it to somewhere else. It doesn't have to have a cafeteria, but I just wonder our role is, because I'm not going to support anything with that kind of a price tag on it, and without some more knowledge of why it's happening in the first place. But go ahead.
Well, let's keep the conversation going. I see that Secretary Clauser is here. She's due at 1:45, so I'm going to try to speed up the rest of this portion and get to the secretary as soon as we can. Trisha, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I just wanted to say that, the State House expansion has been going on for years. I'm just going to pull out all the studies we've been doing for years and years. It's been going on. And from 69, this one's from 69. And it's, so we have we've got to do programs. We have to review the program some, but we've been doing, and the plan continually has been very similar to what is being presented. Dan just sent me Freeman French did something very similar also. So we know that, what is needed by the users of the building. We've known that for 20 years, 30 years, and what they would like. And I agree that if we had done this project back in 2004, it would have been 10, 12 million. But we're in a different world now. It's a lot of money. And we're in these small, tight rooms. And because of it, we didn't move forward. So yes, I think that taking advantage of this funding would be great. If the funding's not there, that's up to you. But it's just, I think it's time. So, but that's your choice.
There's other departments that need space also, not just the legislature. The liquor control has been working under conditions that are unbearable for the last 20 years. And we haven't proposed that adding on to that or building on to that. So we single ourselves out that we need a $25 million expansion. It's pretty hard to justify. Yep. There'll be other comments. Thank you.
We will set up the committee for having that debate. And at this point, all I'm trying to do is get the committee brought up to speed to what work has been done thus far. There are still people who are talking about different things, amongst which are that we not do anything. But I think that's a conversation for another day. The committee at this point is just learning what has been done with the committee that was charged with coming up with some suggestions. Janet, you had your hand up.
Yes, Senator Benning. Senator Maz, I just wanted to tell you that some things that we've heard through the advisory committee and throughout these conversations over the past, I don't even remember how long now, was it wasn't just for the legislature. I mean, I think it's always hard for the legislature to give to themselves, but it was also for the people of Vermont for coming here to access their government and to making that an experience where they can come. And I know it's been this way and it's been working for many years, but just wanted to tag that on that has been part of the conversation too. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to shift gears and try to get to Secretary Clauser. Welcome to Senate Institutions. You've been before us before, and you know the general routine, so the floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for having me. For the record, my name is Kristen Clauser. I'm the Secretary of Administration, and I believe I was invited to discuss State House expansion and
Yes.
the governor's position on expanding the State House. I just want to make sure that's right before I launch into anything. So, I spoke to the House Committee on Corrections and Institutions last week on a similar topic. I think the governor has been pretty outspoken about his position that he's not in favor of expanding the State House. He believes that the money would be better directed out into the communities in some of the areas that he's been talking about with respect to housing and broadband and connectivity. And for the record, I just want to be clear that that's regardless of funding source. So it's that is his position, not exclusive to ARPA funding, but regardless of funding source. And would just be remiss if I didn't mention, and I know that this committee is familiar with the space that was additional space that was provided to the legislature last year, because a lot of that discussion was in this committee and eventually put into the capital bill. But you know, I think last year we worked together and created a lot of additional space for the legislature in recognition that there was additional space needs for staff and maybe the ability to relocate staff from the State House to somewhere else in the Capitol complex in order to create more room within the State House for folks. So we did work together last year to provide over 21,000 additional square feet to the legislature for that use. And that includes space in 133 State Street, 2 Aiken, and 4 Aiken. In fact, Eric Philcorn and his folks at BGS moved out of 2 Aiken and 4 Aiken and relocated in order to accommodate that space for the legislature, because there was a request to be as close to the State House as possible, understanding that was a need and request from staff. So I do think the administration has worked hard to provide some additional space, recognizing that there's only so much room in the State House and that the legislature did need some additional space. So I wanted to highlight the good work that we did last year in furtherance of creating more space as well.
I'm sure that many folks appreciate the work that was done in cooperation. I know because we've already had BGS come in to talk about their new space that they very much like where they are right now. Mm-hmm. And the process of moving State House staff over there has been a little bit slower, but I think gradually over time, folks are coming to realize that it might actually work and be beneficial. There remains the conversation about the State House. The legislators who are in the State House, there's, as far as I can tell, still an extreme reluctance to move any committees outside of that building. And we all know that the HVAC system is in dire need of an upgrade. One of the problems with getting that upgrade has been making a decision about what's going to happen with the building proper. And I probably should have outlined earlier that when the present cafeteria was built, it was done so with an understanding that at some point in the future, expansion of the State House would include putting a third floor on top of that. And at the moment, there's still a debate about whether that needs to be done or not. But I am trying to get the committee up to speed on where the various players have been in this process. So, Madam Secretary, I appreciate you referring back to the fact that we have had some progress and people were working together in order to accomplish things. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to tell us.
No, that's our position. I feel like we talked about it a lot and talked about it last year, but it is exactly what I said. That the governor wants to get that money out into the community, and isn't in favor of the State House expansion. But I don't think I have a lot more more to say than that. But happy to take questions.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? I don't see anybody chomping at the bit to get into questions here. Thank you very much for coming. And you're free to hang around. We're going to be shifting gears in about 8 minutes. But does anybody have any questions for any of our witnesses thus far? Eric, I did have you on the schedule as a potential witness. I don't know whether you wanted to add anything. Substantive or witty, doesn't matter. You're muted.
I am muted. I am no longer muted. I think all of this has been covered pretty well by everyone else in the room. Usually I'm here as a backstop, and because people have done a pretty good job, I haven't a thing to add.
Okay. Thank you all very much for coming. The conversation will continue, no doubt. As I said earlier, we don't technically have the Capitol bill yet, and whatever pieces that we have to discuss that are contained in the Capitol bill may prompt me to send out another invitation. So keep an eye on your mailbox if you would. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, committee, we're going to take a 5-minute break and come back at 2 o'clock unless anybody else had anything they wanted to say. Janet?
I was just saying bye.
Oh, okay.
And sorry about we had a little bit of technical glitches that were kind of throwing us off. I do apologize. I'm sorry about that.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Committee, if you'd be back at 2 o'clock, please.
I'm going to take us off the live stream.